initiative seeks to rewrite is trying to rewrite the narrative about Africa through our focus on what we consider to be critical pillars. We have narrative shift, of course, ecosystem development funding, job creation and career counseling, but also training and capacity development. So every session that we have as an Africa Forward event is actually centered around one of these strategic shifts we consider to be prevalent to what Africa needs in order to move forward in its development story, in just rewriting its narrative. So right now, I will allow our guests and speakers of the day to tell us who they are. Just maybe for a minute or so, I'll let you tell us who you are. So first, maybe Rose, who is the co-founder and CEO of Epic Africa.
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name is Rose Maruru, and I'm the co-founder of a nonprofit called Epic Africa Foundation. We're a Pan-African organization based in Senegal and working in the data and knowledge generation space, specifically in the civil society sector. So I've been in the global development sector for a few too many decades to mention. And Epic Africa is really sort of the culmination, or was motivated by just a lived experience of working in that space and experiencing firsthand some of the challenges, but also being very excited about the potential and the possibilities.
All right, thank you, Rose. And next to Rose, we have Susan as well, who is the social development specialist. Susan, I won't say more about you.
Thank you. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you're hearing us from. So as you've heard, my name is Susan Jambi Odongo. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya, and I work within the East Africa space. I am, as has been said, a social development specialist. I'm passionate about nonprofit sector. I have been in the sector working in the sector for the last 2 decades. And have a strong belief in seeing local nonprofits being able to bring the change that we desire to see within our continent. So it is a pleasure to be here, and I'll be able to speak more as we continue our conversation.
Amazing. Thank you, Rose. Let's see. And now I said a few words about Africa Forward, but I think a video will help us describe exactly what this movement is about and some of the people behind supporting Africa chapters. So if you just give me one minute and share.
Africa Forward is a groundbreaking initiative co-created by members of the Africa chapters of Catalyst 2030 to rapidly accelerate actions that place our continent's challenges at the heart of collaborative, partnership-driven opportunities. Our goal is to achieve strategic shifts focusing on 5 pillars, evolving the social enterprise and entrepreneurial ecosystem to create strong, supportive, and collaborative social impact through solutions developed on the continent by African social innovators. Let's meet some of the chairs of the Africa chapters driving this mission.
My name is Wamuyu Mahinda.
My name is Luvuyo Khani.
My name is Akufuna Myunda, the co-chair for the Africa Forward Zambia chapter.
I'm Dolores Dixon, co-chair for the Ghana chapter.
My name is Dr. Kelechuko Kese. I'm the Catalyst 2030 co-chair, Nigerian chapter.
I'm John Kama, co-chair Catalyst 2030 Liberia chapter.
My name is Kandai Makonese. We are one of the members of the Zimbabwe chapter.
My name is Delita Puke.
I'm the chief of Catalyst 2030 South Africa chapter.
My name is Samuel Nyombreni. I'm the chair of the Catalyst 2030 Uganda chapter.
My name is Tusime Kenneth, and I'm the founder of Ubuntu Circles Africa. I am the co-chair of the Uganda Catalyst 2030 chapter.
Join us in creating an inclusive, sustainable, and prosperous Africa. Together, we can achieve great things. Visit catalyst2030.net to learn more and be part of the Africa Forward movement. Let's collaborate to shape Africa's sustainable future.
Amazing. All right. So, yeah, thank you, Kim, for confirming. And before I hand it over to our host, we do have Luvuyo present, who is former co-chair of the South Africa chapter, but a chair of the Africa region. And I was wondering if maybe you would have a few words for us before we officially hand it over to our speakers. Luvuyo?
Thank you so much, Daniela, for kind of this opportunity. My name is Luvuyo Khani. I'm the co-chair for Africa Forward with Mamuya, and it's quite an exciting space even today for the session. I'm so looking forward even from the speakers that are going to come in and speaking about for today now. Just like to emphasize, I mean, a part of, because that's a key part of the Africa Forward is about those 5 pillars. Pillars on shifting the narrative. We have to tell a good story about Africa. I mean, that's what, I mean, the Africa Forward, I mean, is all about. That's shifting narratives. It's about ecosystem development to make sure that the policy from the government around social entrepreneurs has been looked at, as well as the social economy can be looked at around that. It's about the funding. Part of the discussion today is all about the funding in terms of make sure that the local social innovators around Africa receive and get the funding now. It's about unemployment, make sure that we're creating employment and the career counseling, because we see Africa is more young people looking for employment. So that's kind of a key, and capacity building and training for social entrepreneurs in Africa, so that we don't find ourselves saying that we're not ready, we don't have what it takes, and we don't know in terms of from a funding, because that's kind of an excuse that is coming in now for that now. So this is all about looking at that now. And there has been some, I mean, amazing sessions that have been there, I mean, for quite some time. And I'm appeal to everyone, just follow the summit, Africa Forward social media channel, and then go to YouTube and see previous engagement that has been, I mean, having, and just look at in terms of what's that now. But today, the session is about translating community needs into donor speak. I mean, that's kind of a session that all of us, we are kind of interested in now. And really, more than anything, just to say to the speakers today, we're so looking forward for the engagement. Also from everyone, please ask questions on the chat. If anything, this is the space. Let's use the remaining 40 minutes, 45 minutes remaining to make sure that we've got a great session now. But welcome you all for the session for today. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Sorry, I forgot to mute. You're so welcome. And thank you for these kind words from our chapter lead, who's currently based in South Africa. Let's see. So the next, we will have Rose, who is the CEO of Epic Africa, once more, share a few of her wisdom, parts of her wisdom with us. And I know you talk about the work that you do with Epic Africa, and just how do we build a beneficial network? I think that's the question that most people have today. But first, we also want to hear from you. Do you? Yes. I'm sorry, I couldn't see this. Thank you. Rose, can you hear me?
Yeah, but not very well.
Oh, I'm so sorry. So I was saying, we handed it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Catalyst team for inviting me to speak here today, or to be with you. I'm going to tell you just the story of Epic Africa, why we exist, what we do, and where we are now. And in so doing, I hope touch on some of those questions that this session is aiming to answer, but also just aligning with very much with the goals of this forum. So who are we and what is Epic Africa? So Epic, the word EPIC, actually, EPIC is like an acronym which stands for Enhancing Philanthropic Impact, and obviously in Africa, hence EPIC Africa. And we are a non-profit organization, Pan-African, based in Senegal. And what do we do? So we equip civil society organizations, funders, and other actors in the social sector with the information and knowledge that they need to do their work effectively. So we are helping to strengthen the ecosystem for civil society and philanthropy on the continent. So in this sense, we also describe ourselves as an ecosystem builder. And how do we do this? Primarily through providing data to answer persistent questions about who's out there, where are they located, what do they do, who do they serve, how big or small are these organizations, and who funds them, and many other questions. For example, in what ways does the sector or do individual organizations, but particularly the sector as a whole, contribute to our communities and to our countries and ultimately to our continent. So for us, we see data as an enabler. So it's not data for the sake of data, but because data enables knowledge, it enables actionable insights into the sectors. It enables learning, and it also enables granular and more complex narratives and diverse narratives about the sector. It's not a homogeneous, mass of organizations. There's a lot of diversity in size, in focus, in how they are run, in funding, et cetera, et cetera. And being able to see that diversity is what enables, as I said, more granular and complex narrative about the sector. So I'll give you just one example of what we mean by this sort of granular and complex narratives. So one of the findings that we're consistently coming across in our surveys, for example, is that, ordinary Africans, individuals, are actually among the top 3 sources of funding for African CSOs. Now, this goes against the popular narrative that the sector is overwhelmingly dependent on external donors. Now, we believe this kind of knowledge and these kinds of insights, and we are working to unpack that a bit more to actually find out what kind of organizations are able to attract individual giving and individual givers, and who are these givers and what motivates them, et cetera, et cetera. So we believe that this kind of knowledge is really necessary if we want to create a more enabling environment for African philanthropy to grow and for change makers to thrive. So in this sense, we see data very much as, and again, an enabler of stories, and we are about telling the story or stories. There isn't a single story, but the stories of this sector. Now, our foray into this space began in 2018, 2019, a year after we were founded, because we were founded in 2017. And we started with the first edition of the African CSO Excellence Awards. And this was really the first initiative of its kind aimed at African CSOs. The subsequent report that we publish, entitled The State of African CSOs, and you can find this on our website, was also the first of its kind. Now, the awards provided a critical entry point and an incentive to encourage CSOs to share their data, to demonstrate their transparency and accountability, and to increase their visibility. By recognizing and highlighting excellence in the sector, the awards also aim to start changing the narrative about the sector by highlighting the incredible work that organizations do, often despite really daunting challenges. Since then, we have been conducting mapping exercises, surveys, and other engagements with the sector. Just a few examples of mappings that we've done in the recent past are a mapping of African economic justice civil society actors. This was at a continent-wide. A mapping of youth and youth-focused organizations with a regional and continental footprint, again, continent-wide. And most recently, we just completed a mapping of African CSOs engaged in humanitarian response in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. That we just, like I said, just completed last month. Now, what are we learning from this work? Four sort of key lessons that are emerging as we engage and map the sector. And the first lesson is that partnerships are really vital because one, the problem that we are trying to solve is multifaceted and complex, and we cannot solve it alone. One example of what we mean by multifaceted and complex is that when it comes to data, not just on civil society, but on the whole sort of social entrepreneurships, social sector, especially citizen-led actions, there's very, very little data that's easily accessible. Because in most of our countries, we lack a sort of central data repository. So sourcing data becomes really difficult. So it requires that we partner with a variety of data holders who include, CSO membership networks, for example, funders, and government regulatory agencies, as well as other data conduits. A second lesson is that CSOs are actually willing to be transparent. They want to be transparent. They want to share data and information about what they do, but they need easy ways to do so. At the same time, the data sharing process cannot be extractive. In other words, we can't just be taking. There really has to, this is not ethical. We don't think it's ethical, and we don't think it's sustainable. So CSOs must derive real value from sharing their information. What do they get in return? And for us, what they get in return is resources, is more curated, more locally embedded solutions, whether it's training that uses, for example, local case studies and makes reference to our actual reality rather than borrowing frameworks from elsewhere and sort of adopting them. The third lesson is that CSOs are eager and really hungry to connect with their peers. They're eager to learn, they're eager to share information about their work. And we have really noted a deep need for locally embedded solutions, whether it's information, tools, services, and also a desire to have access to opportunities, opportunities for alliances with others, opportunities to invest in building their organizational capacity, and opportunities, of course, to funding. Now, the fourth lesson, the last one, is around technology. And I know technology is seen as the answer, kind of magic bullet to a lot of our problems. But what we've learned is that technology is not enough. And where technology intervenes, it must be human-centered. And this is particularly true of the African civil society sector, where we have many organizations that are small, that are not necessarily, well connected or very familiar and comfortable with online tools. So having sort of a human face alongside technology has been very, very important, or is very important for us. So based on all this work and all the lessons that we have learned, EPIC Africa is now consolidated all this learning, culminating in the African Civil Society platform, which we launched just a month ago, just shy of 4 weeks ago, on the sidelines of the East African Philanthropy Network conference in Zanzibar in June. And this online platform is, like I said, is a culmination of our extensive engagement with thousands of civil society organizations from the continent. Across actually continent, we have data from 46 countries. So we've also been listening to funders, and many have told us that they need easier ways to connect to African CSOs, and they need access to a wider and a more diverse pool of potential partners. They say that they need actionable insights to inform their funding approaches and decisions. We have also heard from other beneficiaries of the platform, including individual consultants and consulting firms, researchers, journalists, who all crave for a central hub for information and news about the sector. So the African CSO platform is a response to these needs. And I encourage all of you, please, I'll put the link on the chat just now, and I encourage you to join the platform and explore and contribute to its content. If you join the platform as a CSO, as an individual, as another type of entity, you're able to not just consume what's there, but also contribute to it. You can contribute an article, you can contribute an opportunity that you've come across. So it's really meant to be a space that's dynamic and that's very much user-led. But beyond responding to current needs, the African CSO platform, we believe, holds great promise as a tool to help transform and reposition the civil society sector in Africa. And this is what gets us really excited. And what do I mean by transformation? So it's interesting to know about individual organizations, and there are those that will come to the platform because they're searching. If you're a funder, maybe you want to find organization working in your particular area of focus in country A or B, and you'll be able to see that. But what we really, as Epic Africa, really gets us very excited is the potential of aggregating data across, thousands of organizations, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000. And this is really our ambition, because then that enables us to begin to tell very powerful stories about this sector and to begin to quantify its contribution to national economies. Indeed, our sector is a creator of jobs. It's a provider of services that often fill gaps left by government. We also procure goods and services, so we very directly, contribute to our economies, but that's a story that's completely untold. But we believe that this level of analysis can begin to unlock a lot of untapped opportunities that are currently out of reach of individual organizations. So aggregation also empowers the sector's advocacy with governments for more enabling environment, characterized by more supportive policies and regulations. Now, this transformative power of data and knowledge is what motivates us to dream big and to imagine a vibrant civil society and philanthropy ecosystem with diverse, impactful, and sustainable organizations at the center. We believe this is possible, and because we also believe that a vibrant civil society is necessary if Africa is to successfully tackle the growing polycrisis of climate change, inequality, and the youth bulge. So that's us and what we do, and I really look forward to answering your questions and hearing your feedback and inputs. So we're inviting you to join us on this journey. Thank you.
And thank you, Rose. That was actually very, very interesting. And I personally have lots of questions, but I want to move on to Susan. And if there's just one word that I would remember from your presentations, Rose, I would say it's data. It's not something that I would, prior to today, have thought most African CSO were focusing on, but it sounds like it's something that is definitely of importance. If we need support from government, from potential funders, it would be good to have that information. But then again, you say technology is not necessarily the way to go for now, anyways, if I heard it right? So very interesting. And again, I have lots of questions. But let's move on to Susan. And Susan, I know you wanted to share your screen, so I'll just let you do that. Yeah, okay.
Thank you, and thank you to Africa Forward team for this opportunity just to share some insights and share on the topic. And I think similar to Rose, it was interesting when I received this topic, and my first perspective was, no, we should not be focusing on what donors want, is we should get them to understand what we want done, so to speak. And yeah, so I was one of those who was like all about it. But yeah, it's a pleasure to just share. As I said earlier, I'm passionate about ensuring that our local solutions are seen, heard, and understood. And it's on this basis that then I come on board just to talk about the aspect of measurement, evaluation, and learning. Depending on how you look at it in your context. And so I just want to start with a question to the group, and please put it on chat, is when you hear the word MAL, monitoring, evaluation, learning, for some of you call it measurement, evaluation, reporting, and learning, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And I just want to hear some perspectives, and please just put them on the chat, and you can put it as one word, as one statement, on what it is that comes to mind when you talk about, when you hear the term MERL. Lots of data, Data learning evidence, great. Trouble, thank you, Bram. That's a very honest answer. Measuring results, keeping track. So I want to ask a follow-up question based on what I'm saying, is how many of us are very deliberate to do it for ourselves, or are we doing it for donors? Yeah, thank you for your candid feedback. Well, some of the work we do as Lusoma is we work with organizations to support them to really understand the value that they bring to the table, and to be able to look at what are some of the systems and structures they need to put for themselves to be able to remain relevant in the space they work in. And I love the responses I'm getting, because one of the reasons why we actually engage in monitoring and evaluation, and many a times when I've engaged with partners, is they feel monitoring and evaluation is a burden. The process of just having in place tools and systems has been largely directed by either the funding that we receive or based on the influence in which we find ourselves in. It's very rare that we actually initiate the process of measurement, evaluation, and learning from our own perspective. And so just as this illustration shows, is most of us feel like monitoring, evaluation, and learning is just another added burden on what we have to do as organizations. And my hope is that in these few minutes, I can convince you otherwise, and I can convince you to begin looking at why it is important for us to do measuring for ourselves, why it is important for us to do evaluation, but most critically, why it's important for us to integrate the learning component into our work, for us to be able to really begin to appreciate what it is we're doing. And I want to begin with this African proverb that says the depth of a person's life is more important than the length. And when I was thinking about this and the work we've done as Lusoma Advisory Services, is every time we've had conversations with organizations and asked them to reflect on what are some of the changes and what is some of the impact they are having, they tend to focus a lot more on how far they've been able to go or what they've been able to do. Hardly do they look in depth. Yet, when we look at the practices of what monitoring, evaluation, and learning does, is that it helps us to really begin to appreciate the change we are seeing in the community and the contribution we are giving, so to speak. And so we've realized that in our work, we really want to support organizations not to do monitoring and evaluation because it's a requirement, but to begin to appreciate that even with your social initiatives, that you are beginning to put in place, even with the work that you're going to begin doing. It's very critical for us to ask ourselves, what is our contribution to the change that we are seeing in our communities? What is the contribution that we are doing to be able to see the change that we are seeing in Africa, so to speak? And so I'm sure we are well conversant with some of these terminologies. And I think most importantly for me is the aspect of the learning. So we do recognize most people do the monitoring, and I love what most of you have said, is that you do monitoring and evaluation to assess your impact. You want to be able to see the progress, but hardly have we been able to really pick up the learning. So we are very good at doing reports. We are very good at using and coming up with the data and information. But the most critical thing that we love asking is, so what are we doing with the outcomes that we have been able to get out of the reports we develop, out of the data that we develop? Are we actually learning? And what does learning mean? It means that then we are picking the key insights that we're getting, we are picking the key aspects of what it is we have seen from our results, and we are integrating that into our organizational practices. Now, in our work as Lusoma, one of the things we've discovered is we haven't really put in place learning systems. And so what has happened is we are very good at generating a lot of reports, a lot of data, but what it does in terms of helping us grow as institutions has remained a gap in everything that we do. And it's not just about ourselves. I think this is a thing as nonprofits that I always emphasize in our work, is that we need to recognize that we are facilitators of change. And so what does that mean? It means that then we are supporting the communities we work with to be able to see the change and bring the change. Unfortunately, in our monitoring, evaluation, and report development, we hardly have been able to take these results back to the communities we work with. Yet that is where the learning platform is for us to be able to grow and be effective. So even as we have this conversation, I think I want to just take us back to understand what is the value of monitoring and evaluation and learning for us. And this is just an illustration that we use in our processes of helping people to appreciate MAL. And one of the things we say is, we really need to understand the context in which we work in. Why? Because it's in that context that we begin to understand what are the drivers of change. What are those aspects that will help us to bring the change we want to see? But alongside that, what are some of the issues and the social challenges, and where are they stemming from? And that is where we need to begin from. Now, most of us hardly take time to understand our context. Normally, we get into the work, we see what the problem is, and we aspire and champion to bring the change. But we don't recognize that the change we seek to bring, the problem that we're trying to address, exists within a context. And so it's very important for us to understand what the context is, for us to be able to understand, then if this is a context we are working in, then what are those issues that are causing the problem to continue to exist? And if these are the solutions we are seeking to bring, then what is that pathway of change we need to move towards to help us to, one, address the issue, but most importantly, begin to see the long-term change that we want to see. And that is where we actually get this whole idea of a theory of change, is that it helps us to describe in the work that we are doing it towards seeing this change, both in the short term and in the long term. Why? Because we want to be able to see the community we work with see a solution that is enabling them to grow or to develop in a direction that helps them to be effective citizens in the spaces they're in. Now, having looked at this from an external perspective, we also need to look at it from an internal perspective. I know most of us are running social impact programs or projects. And it's important for us to understand that when you're looking at the whole aspect of measurement, of evaluation and learning, we need to recognize that it actually goes full circle. And what do we mean by full circle? It means that when we are beginning to think about designing a program, we need to be clear about the context, but within that context, we need to recognize that there are risks and there are assumptions. And those are things we need to take into consideration. So that when it comes to the implementation, you're looking at how are you going to be able to assess the change that you want to see? What are some of those aspects that will help you to see the program move in the direction that you want it to go? But beyond that also, how are you mitigating the risks and addressing those assumptions. And beyond that also is recognizing that the learning doesn't have to come in the end. The learning has to come within the processes that we are in. So are we taking time to reflect, to learn, to realign, so that then the change that we want to see begins to have effect now as we continue doing our work, and we shall be able to see greater impact towards the end. And beyond that also, I think it's important for us to recognize the reason why we also need to adapt measurement, evaluation, and learning is we also need to celebrate our wins. And this is the point we come from, is we need to celebrate the local solutions we've been able to bring on board. And we are able to do that in a way that is demonstrated. So we need to be able to do good documentation. We need to do visibility of the work. And I love what Rose is talking about, because then the platform that they are providing as EPIC Africa begins to be a space where we begin to demonstrate what Africans are doing towards bringing African solutions to address the African challenges that we have. So normally when you look at monetary evaluation, we always see it from this perspective, is that we see it from the perspective of the change that comes, but it's like an iceberg. What we see on top requires a lot more work to happen at the bottom. Ideally, this is what I want to encourage you to begin thinking about. You are talking about the fact that you want to be able to show the amazing work you're doing and to attract partners, whether it's donors or whether it's local partners, to be able to work with you in this process. Is that we really need to recognize that for us to achieve the change that we want to see, that it means we need to put in place systems and structures that can help us to assess this change from the beginning to the end. And ideally, this is what it looks like at the bottom of the iceberg, that we really need to think about what are some of the resources we are putting in that can help us to begin to adapt a learning culture, that can help us to begin to demonstrate some of the impact that we want to have within our communities. What are some of the activities that we are putting in place that can help us to begin to pick some of the learnings that we are seeing? And then how do we ensure that we have systems that can help us to re-strategize, to assess change, and throughout the process, be able to measure the progress that we are achieving, right? And so for us, we need to recognize that we are going to take measurement, evaluation, and learning as critical, then we need to understand that it starts from within. And what does it mean from within? Do we understand our value as organizations? Do we understand what social change we want to contribute towards, right? When we're talking about transformational change as social enterprises, as entities that are seeking to not just make profit, but to be able to impact on people, what exactly are we looking at? What are our indicators of success? And are there tools? We have the tools, we have the knowledge, we have the skills to enable us to put in place. And so as Lusoma, we focus with working with organizations to begin thinking about what it is they want to contribute towards, and then take the steps back towards putting in place systems and structures to help us to be effective. Why? Because we strongly believe that we have the ability to bring solutions that are impactful. But for us to be able to show that, then we need to put in place tools that can help us to assess measurements. But beyond that, let us put tools that can help us to learn and see how to strengthen our work. And so, in a nutshell, I think for us, it's just to have that clarity of, if we want to be able to attract partners who can be able to engage with us, then it's on this basis then that we need to be very clear about what it is we want to be able to achieve. And for us to achieve that clarity, then we need to put in place systems and structures that can help us to not only measure, to not only evaluate the impact we're having, but to help us to learn, so to speak. And in that process, we will be able to have a world that is able to respond to us with the same clarity. And just a few tips, because I know there was an aspect that was raised that we need to be able to ensure that we have processes that are inclusive, is for me, if we begin to look at responding to some of these questions, then we will be able to look at one, how do we bring community to support our work? Because then it's through that we shall be able to ensure that these monitoring, evaluation, and learning processes are not just about us, but it's about those we serve, those we work with, and those we work for. So with that, I just want to stop there. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Susan. Before I extend it to the rest of the audience, I really have one question, and that I think will help us tie together both of our speakers. You know, on one end, we have data. So we have rows, and to me, data is very static, right? And then on the other end, we have Susan, who's talking about constantly about change, about monitoring, evaluating, actually applying the changes. And I just want to have some sort of interlinkage between data, between what I see as static. Maybe data is not as static as I make it sound, but can you help me sort of merge both that, yeah, all processes?
So Susan, do you want me to try? You can try. So for me, I see what we are doing and what Susan is doing as a continuum. Very, very complementary. Because for us, the kind of data we collect is sort of a more at a macro, at an ecosystem level. It's not at an ecosystem level, but also at an individual organizational level. So the data we are collecting is really not about programs and how those programs are managed and run and conceived and implemented and evaluated. We're just providing data very in a macro level to say who is working on what issues. But by looking at that data, and that's why for us aggregation is important. If then you begin to analyze that data, you can see, like, you know, what sectors or what issues are being missed. You know, where is everybody? So when we look at our data, for example, you see that the top 5 sectors that a majority of CSOs are engaged in is health, is very basic service sector, you know, human services, education, health, WASH. There's quite a bit of human rights, and I forgot the 5th one. We're seeing very, very few organizations that are focusing on the issues of our day. It's not to say that we don't need health and education, we still do, but now we are faced with all these other new crises, or not so new crises, but they're suddenly becoming very urgent, and we're not seeing much traction there. And looking at that and asking, why is this so? And of course, there are many reasons, including that for the longest time, our focus has been driven by donor interest. So soon, if they abandon education and start doing climate, we're all going to run to climate. So, so we hardly ever respond to what we need and our own agenda that's driven by us and what we need on the continent. We tend to respond to, you know, where the money is coming from. And I think what Susan and I are both saying is the need to understand what are the problems we're trying to solve. How big are they? What can we do? Me as a CSO, individual organization, what can I do? What strategy can I use? So that's what I say. It's sort of a continuum. It's not either or. And we need all these things. We need all these things together. And just the last point, you know, we have a lot of CSOs that come to EPIC Africa. They need help with, and even when I worked elsewhere, they need help with fundraising. That's what everybody's after. I need money. And the first thing I ask, the money to do what? Because fundraising for me is stage 5 of 5 stages of your program development. What are you trying to, why do you think is that a problem? So, you know, you have people saying, oh, girls are not going to school in my area, that we need to build a primary school. Maybe that's not the solution. Who told you that solution will work? So really interrogating what, you know, the interventions that we're putting out there. How do we know, what's the hypothesis that is going to work? So have you looked at all other programs, read what has been done, the learning that has been done before you decide building a school is the answer? So we find that our sector is really poor at learning and we keep like making the same mistakes. People still dig wells, you know, in villages, and it's like, oh, we stopped doing that in 1980 when we found out just digging a well and leaving it there, it doesn't work. So yeah, so for me, I'm really passionate about learning and data and yeah, so I'll stop there.
No, Rose, I think you've really touched on it is the importance of data is that it helps us to build evidence. And for the longest time, we have, as I said, we've taken a donor-driven approach. The evidence you provide is based on what the donor needs. We hardly look at it from the perspective of, as an organization, why do I exist? As a social enterprise, why am I in this space, right? And so in that sense, and being able to build or grow evidence using data to be able to demonstrate that whether the donors are interested in this area or not, my role is to demonstrate that I am a change maker. And how will I be able to demonstrate I'm a change maker is if I have the data that then can enable us to show that. And to be able to say, it's okay, if that's where everyone is moving to, climate financing, that's great. But guess what? We still have issues of menstrual health that continue to exist, right? And so it's in that sense, I think for me, that it demonstrates that. The other aspect of it is that we really need to demonstrate our value as nonprofits. We're in a space where there's civic space that's being, continues to shrink and reduce. We're in a space where communities are having limited trust on nonprofits, but yet the work still demonstrates that we need to exist as social enterprises, as NGOs, as CBOs, who are able to facilitate the processes of change. Now, how do we show that value? The only way we can show that value is, again, if we are collecting data to demonstrate our contribution into this. And so for me, I would say I agree with Rose, is that it's not neither nor, is how we're using data, but at the same time, how we're putting in place systems and structures that can help us to ensure that we have a way of collecting this data and use the data to help us learn and improve on our work.
All right, thank you both. I think those were very, very good answers. Before I go and open my own CSO, I have so many steps before I actually get money. This is kind of hard, but thank you. All right, so we don't have that much time, unfortunately, but we can take a few questions. So if anyone has a question or a comment, please just share, open your mic and share.
Can I speak?
Yeah, of course. Please go ahead.
Luther Diedrichs, South Africa. The challenge I foresee about data, I'm passionate about the change data can make, but data is not integrated and shared. I'm exploring software Snowflake, which makes it possible for multiple suppliers and users of data work together, finding the systemic integration. Instead of duplicating data, sharing data, and converting the data into information to inform our programs. That is our biggest problem we have in South Africa, is information. There's multiple data sources available, but most of it is not integrated. Any thoughts on that?
Yes, you're absolutely right. And it's definitely, when I talked about partnerships, for example, with data holders, you're right, it's not that data does not exist, it exists in multiple pockets, in multiple forms. And one big challenge is exactly that of integrating. Now, there are, I think today, technological solutions to that. So what we're having is not a technological problem, it's a social problem. How do we convince you, the data holder X, like my government, that you need to open data, you need open data? How do we, convince funders to share? I mean, they collect tons and tons of data on the organizations they fund, and those that they don't fund, but who send, responses to RFP. So there's a lot that exists already, but there hasn't been any success in convincing those that hold the data to do what it takes to share. And it also includes, working and agreeing on things like taxonomy, what do we call things, so that it's comparable. But the tech solutions exist. APIs and all kinds of other methods of integrating and feeding into and from different sorts of data sets. But it's a huge project that needs partnerships. Strong partnerships.
Thank you. I think, but the mountain is big, and the strength is little. But I think if we can start with a small group, I'm sure you already have the early starters that's prepared to trust and share. And once you get to the critical mass, the remaining will either become absolute or they will join. So instead of being kind of scared by the mountain, let's take the first few steps. Let's find a few. And the Snowflake, I don't know if you're aware of the software Snowflake. I'm exploring a free month version of them. They have multiple databases already available that could be tapped into. And unfortunately, I was born BC. I'm older than computers.
Put your hand up if you're in that group.
And it took me 5 emails just to tell them, now where do I start evaluating the software? And now he's got so far, the engineer got so far and give me A, B, C, D. I say, great, I'll do that over the weekend and see if I can master the program before I'll get the shock, what it would cost. Because there are software available that can fine-tune and clean your data and develop a dashboard, how to convert it into information. But there's also quite a 5-figure price tag for annual membership just to get access to the software. So that's quite expensive. But I'm sure if we can just get the data, I think then the data use, there's multiple people that people is prepared to pay for information, but not prepared to pay to gather data. So if we can have the data, develop it into a product that could generate income for the system to make it grow and invest into the system, and it becomes, and Catalyst 2030 could be an ideal platform to making it internationally available, focusing on the social developmental goals and achieving them.
Thank you. Please send me an email.
All right. Thanks, Luther. I know Zimkita has a question, so maybe we go to her before we close. Zimkita?
We've been engaging on the chat. But yeah, I think I'll just summarize my main thrust is that we've got, I think public and private sector have a specific environment that they need to be able to produce for, us to have a thriving society. And civil society has local on the ground knowledge of this. But we are not identified in any type of policy document where you're saying these consortiums, or how do we tap into this ecosystem as the only active agent? So my question was, how do you bridge that gap for us to be identified as probably the best fit of agents that can deliver the solutions that we need for Africa? As we are hypothesis testing and doing everything, but we are the most local help, as opposed to having a top-down solution,
I think I'll want to provoke our thinking around this. Is first, who said we are the best in, or are the best placed as non-profit players? I think in my work, one of the things that I have come to appreciate is, as non-profits, we have really been speaking to ourselves in our language. And that has kind of isolated us. in being able to get into other spaces and demonstrate that we are part of a system. And so for me, it's to challenge us and ask ourselves, one, when we are measuring the impact we've had, are we doing it on our own? Or are we also asking other players to measure us? And it's painful because the truth is we have to accept that there are areas we have failed. And that's why I say the learning component in MEL has really been underestimated by nonprofits. We need to take that learning. And that learning means being told that we speak to ourselves, that we are not being effective, and picking that and looking at what is it we need to do to create a counter narrative of who we are and the value that we bring, right? So I want to bring that from that perspective first. And then secondly is to ask us, what spaces are we in? And when we get into those spaces, are we getting into those spaces as solution providers, or are we getting into those spaces to add more issues into existing problems, right? And this is where, as nonprofits, we really need to also take a step back and ask ourselves, do we recognize who we are? If you recognize yourself as a technical advisor on this area, if you recognize that you have a strength in community engagement, are we going into spaces that then are helping us to demonstrate that and to show the solutions we are providing? I think once we begin to engage in that level, where we are, again, proactively getting into spaces, but also proactively inviting these other players, the private sector, government entities, to be in a sit-down space with us, I believe that is where we shall start having a change of narrative and a recognition of who we are as nonprofits and the value we bring on the table. Because remember, as I said, it's about evidence. And evidence is not presenting a 60-page report. Evidence is being able to, one, show how you're working with others and what that has been able to produce in terms of results. And as I said on the chat, government wants to see what economic value are we creating as nonprofits. Unfortunately, we have been unable to translate our social impact into economic value. And those are some of the things we need to start doing. And that's why I like what EPIC is doing, EPIC Africa is doing, because that is what it is. It's about us translating some of these things that we are doing into a language that then gets us recognized, so to speak, right? And for me, I think that's where we need to go.
Yep.
That was brilliant. Thank you.
I applaud the wisdom of Susan and Rose. I would love to make myself available of anybody that wants to look at an Africa solution of have an integrated system-orientated database and sharing and making that work. I don't think with the technology kind of rapidly expanding and making more and more available, especially with AI, now is the time. And I come from the entrepreneurial side. It took me 15 years to realize there's the other side, the social enterprise side. So now I'm doing both, because the solution does not lie only in social enterprise, at least in entrepreneurial enterprise taking hands. And it's not a sin for social enterprises to make money. They won't go to hell. They might be rewarded for it.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you, Luther. And I think we have Susan's and Rose's information shared amongst everyone. And I hope I can say that they can feel free to reach out to you in case they wanted some clarity or some more information with your work or with everything that we've discussed today. Again, thank you so much, Susan and Rose, for speaking on these very important, not issues, but very important topics, which would allow any CSO to move forward with more confidence and maybe even take a step back before moving forward. Take a step back and really realign with what their values are and how they want to become those change makers, what they need in order to become real change makers in their communities, right? So that was really empowering. And just so everybody knows, one of the topics that we said is, regular CSO interest is actually what we will discuss next month in August. It's going to be education. But again, in most of our countries, unfortunately, we still have these primal needs, right? We're not looking at Montessori. Maybe education can be, how do we bring back education that we had 500 years ago before colonization hit? How was it more valuable? What are we lost, right? So I'm not sure what the topic will be, but it will be on education, and how our current our speakers for next month are seeing education. We will share more details on our social media channels. But again, thank you so much for attending and taking the time to speak on this topic. On that, I wish you a very great rest of your afternoon. And yeah, we will just hang out if you want to.
Okay, bye.
Thank you and all the best.
I have to jump off. Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so
course.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye.